Coming to paperback and e-readers in 2021, John Haynes, Taking Care of Business. The man who rules the world breaks in a brand new partner to help him take care of business in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Get John Haynes, Taking Care of Business in 2021 at online booksellers everywhere.
Last Saturday, Jason Nightingale is alleged to have gone on a shooting spree where he wound up murdering 3 people. And while police are stumped as to finding a motive for why Jason Nightingale participated in this mass shooting in Chicago, when I take a critical examination of all the details as related to this case, it fits right in line with the pattern and profile for beta males that I talk about in my book, The Man Crisis. And as I studied the details of 32-year-old Jason Nightingale's background, he fit right in line with the pattern and profile for these beta male mass shooters that I talk about in a chapter of my book, Mass Shootings and the Man Crisis. And some of his behavior also fits within the pattern and profile I talk about as related to addiction and the man crisis. And it was clear to me from reading about Jason Nightingale's story that he clearly was a man in crisis, and he was a ticking time bomb that was going to go off sooner rather than later. Now, most people really didn't identify that your Jason Nightingale was deeply troubled, but as I read about his post on social media, I could clearly see how his behavior was fitting right in line with the behavior I have seen from other mass shooters like Elliot Rodger and like Stephen Paddock before him. Because your Elliot Rodger, who came before your Jason Nightingale, put a lot of posts on social media talking about how he was going to participate in an act of violence, and most people did not take your Elliot Rodger seriously, and others did not take Stephen Paddock's erratic behavior very seriously. They didn't really see it as something troubling that this man owned an arsenal of guns and was transporting that arsenal of guns to that Las Vegas hotel. And the reason why many didn't identify these behaviors is because most people are not really trained on how to identify the dysfunctional behavior of a beta male, or to look at the indicators that are going to lead to a beta male participating in one of the spectrum of violent behaviors they are capable of participating in. But once I read about the social media posts that your Jason Nightingale was making and saw the videos that Jason Nightingale was making, I could clearly see that there were indicators that were leading up to this man going to participate in this act of violence that he participated in last Saturday, because all of the patterns were right there as I saw it, as related to him. And most people, they were just thinking, oh, he's fighting some demons or he had some problems. But the problem was he was probably raised in a very dysfunctional household. And like all of these other beta males, what led to this male participating in this act of violence was the years of being raised in that dysfunctional household, and that created a ticking time bomb that wound up simmering and boiling in anger for years, and then he eventually wound up exploding in the rage where he participated in this mass murder. Now, your Jason Nightingale was someone who had a very deeply troubled life. He had been in and out of prison. He had been arrested multiple times. And that was, again, fits right in line with the pattern and profile for a lot of beta males, because a lot of beta males have a hard time dealing with authority and dealing with authority figures. And that's what leads to them winding up running into law enforcement. Moreover, your beta males oftentimes have real serious problems that mount as a result of them being in and out of jail. That adds to the simmering and boiling in anger, and it also adds to the deterioration of their mental health in certain cases, because some people possibly believe that your Jason Nightingale might have wound up participating in this murder spree as a result of mental illness. But I believe that many of his issues probably come from the way he was raised in that home where he grew up, and those issues were never really resolved in counseling, and this is what led to him still having to struggle with these issues, and then winding up eventually having it where his mental health in some ways might have deteriorated and led to him again exploding in this rage. Now, some people say he had some problems and again was a wonderful father, but there's something missing here. But I can again clearly see how he was one of these beta males who was in crisis. And what was really sad was most people could not identify this man in crisis and get him the help that he needed, because had somebody come out here and gotten this young man the help that he needed, then maybe we could have saved people's lives, and maybe we could have saved Jason Nightingale's life, because he wound up being killed by the police as a result of this incident. And maybe if more people knew about this man crisis that was going on, we could have gotten this man some help. Because again, when I read his story and I read about his background, I just see a guy who fits the pattern and profile of one of these beta males that I talk about in the man crisis. And I saw a guy who was a ticking time bomb. And what was really sad about this whole case is he was a ticking time bomb people could have possibly diffused had he been given some help and possibly an intervention to let him know that his behaviors were just not something a normal person does. Because as I see it, I could see him as one of these guys who was beta males who's in this rose-colored reality, and his grip on reality was slipping very quickly. And he was, as he was participating on these videos on social media, he was just in his own world, and he needed people to pull him back to the real world, and he needed people to let him know that there were going to be people there for him. But because there was no support system for this man, he wound up exploding in this rage and participating in this horrific act of violence. And it just shows me again how many people really are not taking this man crisis seriously. Many people look at Jason Nightingale's shooting spree as just another act of violence, but this violence fits a pattern when you start to look at it and compare it to other incidents that are going on across the country. Because again, once you start to compare the incident in La Isla Vista and to this incident in Chicago, you start to see a very similar pattern as related to the behavior, and you start to see that if you really start to look in the background of these guys, you're going to see one core foundation to it probably, and that core foundation will be the way these boys were raised, possibly in a single mother household or a household with a beta male father. And in those homes, many of these males don't get the male life skills that teach them how to navigate a course in the world. And many of these males, like your Jason Nightingale, they wind up falling apart because they don't know how to function in the real world. And I think that's one of the reasons why he was in and out of jail, is because he probably was growing up in a single mother household and possibly did not get those male life skills and survival skills that he needed. and he wound up falling apart and falling through the cracks. And as he was falling through those cracks, his life was continuing to deteriorate, and his mind was continuing to fall apart. And this wound up leading to him eventually where he was participating in these rants talking about how he's going to blow up the community, how he's fighting Satan in some things. He had all of these demons, but he didn't have anybody to give him any sort of spiritual guidance in the Most High, and he had nobody there to give him structure and order. And this is one of the reasons why he wound up becoming a male in crisis. And again, most people are not really, they're looking at it as an isolated incident, but once you go out here and take a critical examination of other mass shootings and start to look at all of the data, you start to see that Jason Nightingale is not an isolated individual. He is part of a group of males who fit a pattern and a profile, and that pattern and profile all have one constant connection: the way these males were raised. And the way we are raising boys is not creating a generation of functional and healthy men. No, the way we have been raising boys for the last 50 years in this country is developing a 2 to 3 generations of beta males. And many of these beta males, because they have learned feminine life skills and feminine social behavior, they don't know how to navigate the world as men. They don't know how to set a course for themselves in the world as men. And when they go out into the real world and have to deal with things like male authority figures or setting a course for their own lives, what happens to those men is they wind up falling apart, and they wind up not being able to function. And as they become more and more frustrated because they're trying to make the world work the way a woman makes the world work, and they don't know how to make the world work the way a man makes it work, these men wind up with, some of them with their mental health deteriorating, and others wind up getting so frustrated because they keep hitting their heads against the wall, and they wind up simmering and boiling in anger that they hold in themselves, and again eventually wind up exploding in rage, where they wind up going out and participating in violent behaviors like these shooting sprees, because they don't know how to make the world function the way a man knows how to make it work. Now, this man crisis is something that has been going on for over 50 years. Unfortunately, most people don't want to talk about it because they're afraid of alienating all of these women out here. Many of these guys out here, they don't want to hold these women accountable for the way that these boys are raised. They don't want to say anything because they fear they may not get access to females in the sexual marketplace. But when we look at our society, it is continuing to fall apart because we have all of these beta males out here, and these beta males just don't know how to function like men, and their violence just continues to get worse with each passing day. And the reason why it continues to get worse is because most here in America, we want to deny the issues in front of us. We want to see these crimes as isolated incidents, and we don't want to acknowledge the man crisis going on in this country. Many of these men out here are deeply troubled. Many of these men are having a hard time making the world work. And many of these men are falling completely apart and falling through the cracks. And like your Jason Nightingale, are in desperate need of help. But sadly, most people don't know how to help these men because many people, they're thinking, oh, this guy has some sort of either mental health issue, or they're thinking he's got some other issue. But we really need to understand that this man crisis is real, and that men are suffering around us every day. And we really need to understand that these are, again, not isolated incidents. This is a crisis going on in this country. And unless we start to acknowledge this crisis, we're going to see many, many more of these violent behaviors all throughout the country because we don't want to acknowledge the man crisis in this country where these males, because of the way they're raised, don't understand how to make the world work. And because they don't know how to make the world work, they want to destroy the world around them. And when I look at Jason Nightingale, I see not another random incident. And when I look at the motives as I see it, he was a man in crisis. He didn't know how to make anything work. So that's why he went on a kill spree, because he wanted to die himself in some ways, because he just didn't know how to make things work for him. And that's indicative of many of these men of these later generations. Because there's no male figures to teach them about the world of men, they wind up becoming men in crisis and destroying the world around them. Now, if you want to learn more about how beta males become violent, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find it on Smashwords, the iBookstore, and Google Play. And I'm hoping after you read The Man Crisis, it will help you understand why so many men are deeply troubled. And I'm hoping that anybody who reads The Man Crisis can possibly save their lives, because I wrote this book because I saw so many men winding up on drugs, winding up in prison, winding up committing suicide, and winding up with their lives falling apart. And many men have had their lives transformed by the man crisis, and I'm hoping that by more men reading this book, it will take more men out of crisis and help them get on the road to healing and recovery. Now, if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available in paperback and e-readers, The Temptation of John Haynes. Give in to temptation and pick up this action-packed